Welcome back. Welcome back. We are excited. This is about the time in the afternoon where I hope you all stretched and stood and took in the power of the Holy Spirit. We definitely want to say a special thank you to Ville Marie and Jose Manuel for their incredible lesson on fellowship. It sparked some amazing conversation in the chat, so we're grateful for you all taking the time in your breakout groups and everything else to share about the importance of this habit of fellowship. And now we're going to move straight into our next habit on generosity. And it is with deep pleasure and a humble honor that I get to introduce a colleague and a friend. It is a rare time where I get to appreciate what God has called us to do together in this project for all of the writers that have been a part of this, and for President Leann Van Dyk. Dr. Van Dyk is the president of Columbia Theological Seminary, where she began serving there in July of 2015. It's incredible. Prior to that, Leann taught at Western Theological Seminary and at San Francisco Theological Seminary and the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. So it's amazing the experience, the wisdom, the insight that President Van Dyk has to share with us on generosity today. We are so excited. Her other professional experience includes serving as a member of the Board of Commissioners for the Association of Theological Schools, as a member of the Committee on Theological Education for the PCUSA, and various projects, including the Reforming Ministry Project through the Office of Theology and Worship in the PCUSA. Very impressive. Absolutely excited to welcome Dr. Van Dyk to the platform to share with us and a deeper understanding of the habit of generosity. So welcome.
Thank you, Catherine. Friends, it's so good to be here. I'm happy to be here with you to share insights on the habit of generosity. I was so pleased when Catherine asked me to dive into this topic, because the more I looked, the more I discovered that generosity is kind of a big comprehensive habit of evangelism that pulls in all kinds of other wonderful things. And we're going to have a chance to explore some of that this afternoon. You maybe have heard about the paradox of generosity. You see that paradox expressed in the verse from 2 Corinthians chapter 9 that's up on the slide. You will be enriched in every way for your great generosity. This is the paradox that giving brings back so much to us. Giving brings back additional gifts. This is the paradox of generosity. And some of the things that generosity pulls in that I explored in some of the earlier initiatives from this project, the written essay and the webinar, that we discovered that generosity is attractive, and it is contagious, and it is gregarious, and it is empathetic. So these are some of the additional gifts of generosity, but we're going to discover even more this afternoon. I have yet another opportunity, and I'm going to use a new metaphor, the metaphor of colors. I've discovered that generosity nourishes evangelism as surely as water and sunlight nourish the trees outside this room here at Montreat. And this time I wanted to use the image of colors and hues and tints, the palette of colors that generosity offers us. To people who might be watching us live our Christian lives, they will see this palette of colors, and it will attract them to the confession that we claim in our faith. So let's look at the colors of generosity. I am going to suggest 4. The 4 colors are behold, clothe, abide, and love. And we are going to start with behold. That is what I'm suggesting is a color of generosity. Now, I'm going to suggest that underneath behold, there are 3 additional hues or tints. So the colors of behold are surprise and lament and learning. And those colors of behold come from the word in the Hebrew that is captured by the Hebrew word henna. Now here's a really interesting little factoid. The word behold occurs 1,275 times in the King James Version, and it occurs 27 times in the NRSV. And I'm going to explain in the next slide why there's such a dramatic difference. But we do see the word behold a lot in the Bible. Look at this text from Luke chapter 2, the words of the angel to the shepherds. Behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy. So behold is a color of generosity because first we have to notice, we have to pay attention before we can give generously. So now let's go back to that difference between translations. The little tiny Hebrew word behold is henna. And henna, my Old Testament colleague at Columbia Seminary told me, is a particle of interjection. It is, in other words, a little verbal signal that something is unique, something is really interesting. It's a little bit like, wow, or look at that. So when the Old Testament uses henna, some English translators chose to use the word behold. In the NRSV, the translators captured that moment of surprise in some other ways other than using the word behold. But I'm suggesting that behold is a color of generosity because it is saying, pay attention. Something interesting is happening here. So now let's look at the 3 tints or hues of behold. They are surprise, lament, perhaps interesting and surprising to you, and learning. So let's look at those words that capture an aspect of behold. Surely surprise is a part of behold, right? In order to truly behold, which is necessary for the generosity that then supports evangelism, in order for us to truly behold, we have to be open to being surprised. Surprise, then, is a part of behold. So is lament. Surely, lament is a part of behold. When we truly pay attention, we often are led to lament, to mourn, to grieve. Lament, too, I suggest, is a part of behold, which undergirds generosity, which feeds and nourishes evangelism. Can you see that lament is really in the mix of what makes generosity possible? The final hue or tint in behold is learning. Learning also is part of behold. How can we really see if we are not open to really learning. Phil Marie and Jose Manuel just a little while ago talked about fellowship, and the main part is listening, paying attention, learning. So learning is part of Behold, which is a color of generosity. I hope you can see now that we are creating a palette of generosity, the color wheel of generosity. Now, the second bigger category, the second color of generosity is clothe. Now, I mean this in the Pauline sense, that we clothe ourselves with the virtues and practices and habits that lend generosity to be possible, that lead straight to generosity. And then that generosity, I'm suggesting, leads to authentic evangelism. This is Paul's vision, that we put on Christian practices and habits, and we practice wearing them. Virtues, for instance, is a practice that needs to be continually repeated in order to become deeply embedded in us. And then the word practices. You may remember that Malcolm Gladwell once said that any skill takes 10,000 hours of practicing. Well, let's practice generosity so that we become expert at generosity. Likewise, practices is very similar to the habits. The habits is another thing that we clothe ourselves with. Generous people give out of habit. It's second nature. And don't you think that the habit of generosity is one of the best evangelism strategies? When generosity becomes so part of who we are that it just shines out in a color that is deeply attractive to others. Now we're going to be looking at the third color of generosity. And here I have chosen the word abide. And then I suggest 3 tints of abiding that I'm naming community, forgiveness, and service. So you can immediately see what this color conveys. It's the color of koinonia, of bearing one another's burdens. They characterize generosity because they nourish evangelism. Now, here's the first one. I'm going to give you a minute to read it. Let's face it, community is not always easy, is it? So many insecurities, so many obstacles. But community is a primary way that we abide with each other, that we bear with each other. And this is a habit of generosity. Forgiveness is another aspect of abiding that supports generosity. Here is Rembrandt's famous painting of the return of the prodigal son. Did you know that some art experts see in this painting one man's hand and one woman's hand embracing the prodigal? If this is correct, Rembrandt is indicating that forgiveness is the call of the whole community, the whole people of God. And then the tint of service. Here is another artistic rendering of the Good Samaritan, how we abide with one another by serving one another. Serving is the very heart of generosity, isn't it? The final color of generosity is love. This is not unexpected. Surely, generosity is a color of love, and love is a color of generosity. This you may recognize from the Atlanta airport. I have walked past this sculpture from a Zimbabwean sculptor dozens of times in my years at Columbia Seminary. I am always deeply moved by these astounding portrayals of familial love. Many of the sculptures in that corridor between Terminal A and B are of family groupings, and this one captures the family's love for a young child. So I chose this piece of art to encompass what I mean by love, the kind of community-forming power of love. Again, 3 hints or 3 hues that I am proposing. Now, it's not forwarding. Yes, there it is. One of the tints of love is expectancy. What could possibly happen is an attitude of expectancy. What might emerge from the cocoon of waiting into a beautiful new creature? The bated breath of love, the eager expectation of love, the wide opened hope and expectation of love. This is part of what nourishes generosity, our wonder at what might happen. Another hue or tint is delight. Isn't love colored by delight? And isn't a baby's squeals of joy the perfect example? Love includes delight, and generosity should certainly include those squeals and laughter of delight. This is a part of what makes the color wheel of generosity. Love is also tinted by patience and forbearance, isn't it? The love that undergirds generosity must be persistent and patient. After all, God's timing is not known to us. So what we have done so far is created the color palette of generosity. Now, maybe you are feeling burdened by all these things that you have to do. 4 main headings and 3 under each of those. That's a lot to keep track of. But please remember, friends, this basic rule of Christian living, the indicative prompts the imperative. God so loved the world is the indicative statement which proclaims a huge truth. All of the imperatives of our lives flow from that. Those imperatives of behold, clothe, abide, and love, they all are not burdens, but responses, as is generosity, a joyful response of gratitude. The Christian faith is always prompted by what is, and what is, of course, is God's extravagant love. So now we will have some time to talk together in the breakout rooms. Here are your main categories, and the questions that will be put up in the chat are these. You don't have to quickly read them now. They will be in your chat bar. And when you get to the groups, I suggest that you choose one of those main themes: behold, clothe, abide, love. And you use that one theme to go through one or two of these questions. That's really all the time that we'll have. So let's take 15 minutes, 20 minutes perhaps if we have the time. Heather will organize this. And together talk in your groups. Then when you get brought back into the plenary, let's talk a little bit about what you learned in your groups, and we can share them together in the chat bar. So friends, go ahead and go into your groups, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you found your conversations fruitful. We have a chance now to debrief a little bit and share together. I thought it might be helpful to explain a little bit about why on earth I found those four words: behold, clothe, abide, and love. And as I said in the beginning, right from the beginning of this REvangelism project on the 8 habits that support and feed evangelism, I have been struck by how big and comprehensive generosity is, and how it just includes so many Christian virtues and habits and instincts and practices. So as I did my reading and thinking through this really unique call of generosity, I discerned that it really has these 4 main components. Behold, in other words, pay attention. Clothe, develop habits and practices. Abide, help one another, bear one another's burdens. And love, bring forth all the assets and the instincts and the strengths of your community together. I became convinced that those 4 words really captured this big, comprehensive call of generosity. And I then thought, it's like a color wheel. It's like a beautiful blend of virtues that make up one convincing characteristic of Christian life. So I thought maybe I would begin by telling you a story of my own development in one of these main characteristics of generosity. I hope you in your groups were able to hear stories from one another, but let me just give you one. As I considered my own Christian development, I think that the first aspect of generosity, behold, has been the most vividly real for me in the past 6 years or so. My experience in the Columbia Seminary community has been profoundly important to me in this aspect of behold. In other words, pay attention, lament when there are wrongs and failures that we need to mourn, and develop new patterns and practices of learning. So the surprise of beholding and the aspect of learning and the aspect of lament, those have been very important in my own Christian development in the past half a dozen years or so. I think particularly with respect to the challenge of diversity, I now live and work in a community that's highly diverse. Lo and behold, that means not everyone is like me, and I'm not like everyone else, and that calls forth from me these challenges of lament and learning and surprise, those hina moments, those moments of pay attention, something important is happening here. And the more that I listen and learn and mourn when there is something deep to mourn, the more I'm able to be generous. Does that make sense? I find that the generosity of beholding immediately leads to the invitation of love. So these things are all connected, aren't they? The command of clothing ourselves immediately leads to the next command of abiding. When we practice those virtues and those habits, then we are able to bear one another's burdens. So those words, I think, are all connected. And for me, in recent years, that connection of behold as an invitation to love and patience has been really, really important. And I'm still at it. I'm still learning. So let me invite you now to participate in this conversation. There's two ways that you can do that. I don't mind at all for you to unmute your computer and just speak right up. If we were all here in this room, that's what you would do, right? You would put your hand in the air and you would speak. So feel free to choose that, or you can write your question or your insight. Some of the questions that I suggested for you are really asking you to narrate your own stories. So feel free to put your comments and insights into the chat bar or speak up. Carol put in a question that's really important because we are all representing congregations. When you see a congregation and think, wow, they are exceptionally generous, what are you seeing? And I love that because it's very concrete. What am I literally seeing? If I see a generous congregation, I would actually love your ideas on that. For me, it's something that I sense almost within 10 seconds walking in the door. I travel quite a bit, at least before COVID. In my work, I have the great honor of preaching widely in Presbyterian congregations in our area, and almost within 10 seconds, I can sense if a congregation has these virtues of behold, clothe, abide, and love. And I sense it in the quality of hospitality, right? The quality of inclusion. I sense it in the levels of joyfulness and delight. If, for instance, a baptism is occurring and the baby or the young child is crying and the congregation is delighted instead of annoyed, there you have a congregation with one of the virtues of generosity. Certainly a congregation that asks itself, how can we develop a budget that not only pays the bills and fixes the roof, but also serves the neighborhood and our broader world? A congregation that asks itself those questions and then holds itself accountable to living into those questions is yet another example of generosity. So I just named two or three that I notice, but as I say, I would sure love additional ideas. Sharing resources. Yes, exactly. That came up in the chat bar. So do raise more questions either in written form or verbal form. It's now your turn.
Leann, this is Christy Ray, and I think that also generosity is not only sharing
I see that.
of ourselves, but sharing our buildings, sharing our space. We have these spaces, and how can our generosity be a part of using the building for the entire week,
Oh,
not just
yes.
the day?
I'm not sure I got all of the question, but the part that I did get is how can we share the resources that we have, including our buildings? And I have seen many examples of a congregation literally using their square footage to serve their community and often to engage in cross-congregational or even interfaith partnerships. And it's that kind of openness of spirit that it seems to me is an example of generosity. So the additional comment, and openness and opportunity for mutuality, a two-way street of beholding. I'm not the only one that goes into a new situation with an openness to beholding. It only really happens if there is reciprocity, right? So generosity always requires a kind of a reciprocity, an openness to engage in that kind of koinonia. Here's a question that I don't want to miss from Tara. When a that's maybe the one that we just talked about with the actual sanctuary. Their property needs to belong to the greater housing needs of their community and less about a sanctuary. The building of saving lives is the sanctuary. So interesting. How can a sanctuary be an asset of meeting the needs of the community? Would love additional ideas on that if you have them. Let me go to Molly's question. Can you read it to me, Carol?
How do we begin to counter the practice, habit of scarcity and stinginess, especially in a world that is actively participating in zero-sum thinking?
Yes. Culture of scarcity. That is a phrase that I hear quite a lot. When I hear that phrase, it is always in the context of a conversation which is calling rather for a culture of abundance, or a culture of thankfulness, or a culture of joy. I think the culture of gratitude and abundance and generosity and joy must be an absolutely basic Christian attitude and posture and instinct, right? The imperative prompts the indicative prompts the imperative. Well, the imperative is for us is to live lives of gratitude and joy and eagerness to share what has been given to us. Now, I have a little confession to make. I serve Columbia Seminary, and one of my roles in my job is to keep an eye on the budget. So I sometimes, I think, fall into a little bit of a culture of scarcity, because I'm worried about, are we going to make our budget this year? And those of you who are congregational treasurers or business managers might know that feeling as well. We do have some realities that we live with. We do have stewardship campaigns that we run, budgets to approve, and then live into. So I don't want to pretend that it's really easy to transition from a culture of scarcity to a culture of abundance. It's actually a spiritual challenge. I sense that spiritual challenge. But I take it as a reminder from you as participants in this conference to explore what the borders and edges and boundaries of a culture of abundance can be, and keep the scarcity as limited as possible, just to live into our realities. So thank you for that reminder. I appreciate it. Oh, I love this example about one of you are sharing your sanctuary with a temple once a month, and other church and faith communities as well, including after-school programs, AA programs, and so forth. That's wonderful. We actually have, here's a great sentence, we actually have the good problem of sometimes struggling to use it for congregational events. I like that good problem. Well done, Christine. Fletcher, let's take a look at your report from your breakout group. You say one person mentioned empty generosity, like writing a check, or life-giving generosity, going in person to support or stand. That is an interesting distinction. I would certainly not want to say that writing a check is empty. It is often a part of that discipline or practice that I mentioned in one of the headings, the clothe headings, where we literally, in the Pauline sense, put on these habits and virtues that we have to practice. And writing a check on a weekly or monthly or whenever it is that you plan your giving can be a very profound act of service and love. Now, I think it's possible that some people do just scrawl out a check. It doesn't require much sacrifice on their part at all, and that maybe is something that we can critique. But I want to give real affirmation and gratitude to folks that regularly write out checks to support very, very worthy causes such as their congregation or their community's needs. Going in person surely is an additional layer of commitment and generosity, right? But let's just be aware, at least, that sometimes going in person, if we don't have enough behold in us, can actually create situations of patronizing relationships or some kind of domination, not being aware of power dynamics, all these sorts of things that we try to think carefully about. How can we show up in person and do it from an attitude of deep respect, curiosity, listening, the beholding that includes these moments of hina where we think, wow, that's really something. So in each of these patterns of generosity, there's things we need to be alert to so as not to fall into these more negative habits and instead to grow and develop and clothe ourselves with habits that are deeply community growing and community respecting. Thanks for that, Fletcher. Really helpful. Anyone else? Oh goodness, we have just like time for one more short question. We're pretty much almost done. Anybody else? I hope you had time to tell each other stories. I think it's the stories of generosity that are the most motivating, at least for me. I've had fun over the past months while this project was going on, really thinking about generosity, and I hope that some small ways I was able to share that with you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you, President Leann Van Dyk. If we can just show our appreciation, move around, give thanks to God, and give thanks to President Van Dyk for that wonderful, wonderful deeper dive on generosity. I, for one, am enlivened and excited by that talk together. And so now, as we move into a space and a time to just stretch, take a walk, take a deep breath, spend some time in your journal with your colored pencils, just rest in the Lord and abide in Christ Jesus. And we will come back together at 4:15 for our breakout group time together. So we will see you back here at 4:15.